Hello, my name is Jerome Rose, and I am founder director of the International Keyboard Institute and Festival. It gives me great pleasure to bring you these 4 videos, which have basically been the best and the brightest of our wonderful young talents that have attended the festival. They have given you a lecture on all the pieces that they are playing. It was my desire that they would present their wonderful personalities, their wonderful gifts, and their wonderful insights into the music to you, which I find very exciting, which I hope you will as well. Baron Fenwick is from Boone, North Carolina. He is absolutely a product of America, and we are delighted that he is appearing in this video presentation. He has done wonderful things in his career, and we wish him the very best. I want to thank Dean Richard Kessler from the College of Performing Arts, Associate Dean Jessica Cochran, and the stalwart Pavlina Dukovska, the chair of the piano department at Mannes. I hope you'll enjoy this as I have. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Baron Fenwick, and I'm honored to be a part of the International Keyboard Institute and Festival. We are filming here at Mannes School of Music, and I have a very special program planned for you today, featuring some works and composers you may be familiar with and others you may not be. The program is centered around George Perle, an American composer who died in 2009. And I'll be including his Ballade, as well as some works by composers who influenced and inspired him. The first piece I'll play is Chopin's Fourth Ballade in F minor, and then Alban Berg's Sonata, Opus 1. And I'll be ending with another piece written in 2018 by a composer who has become a friend of mine, Logan Vrankovic. And before I play the Chopin Fourth Ballade, one of the most beautiful pieces Chopin ever wrote, I would like to read you a selection from an obituary written by the Polish poet Cyprian Norwid after Chopin died. He said, "He knew how to divine the greatest mysteries of art with astonishing ease. He could gather the flowers of the field without disturbing the dew or the lightest pollen. And he knew how to fashion them into stars, meteors, comets, lighting up the sky of Europe through the ideal of art. In the crystal of his own harmony, he gathered the tears of the Polish people strewn over the fields and placed them as the diamond of beauty in the diadem of humanity." To me, there is no piece of music with an ending as devastating as this ballade. It feels like the music is being ripped apart at the seams. Now I will try my best to give some remarks that will shed some light for anyone playing the piece or listening to the piece. And I have some resources I would like to suggest because there's so much information out there which has helped me. One being the edition of the four ballades written by the pianist Alfred Cortot. Cortot is a controversial figure to some, but as far as the information in his books is concerned, I think it's incredibly useful. He really understood Chopin's technique and has so many exercises about how to develop ease with the material that Chopin has written. The most important principle being to Cortot and I think to Chopin that total ease with the piano and with the material that's written will allow you to have the musical freedom necessary to play his music with all of the spontaneity and imagination and sense of line and melody that Chopin's music is, so wonderful for. There's also this wonderful book by Harold Schoenberg, The Great Pianists, which is not only about Chopin, but takes you through the course of history at the piano. And the first, before Chopin, most pianists like Bach or Mozart or any other keyboardists at the time generally played with curled fingers, as Schoenberg describes. But Chopin comes along and totally revolutionizes piano technique by playing with outstretched fingers. And there's a wonderful quote in here from a contemporary of Chopin's, the pianist Heller, who said that to watch Chopin's hands was to see them suddenly expand like the opening of the mouth of a serpent about to swallow a rabbit whole. So Chopin is really playing with these outstretched fingers, and not only, really everything from the fingertip all the way up to the shoulder and beyond is connected in one entirely supple, coordinated fashion. That's what Chopin, that was natural to him, and that's how he taught and influenced Liszt and most other pianists around him, and that's still how we play piano today, thanks to Chopin. And then there's a third book, which is the new biography by Alan Walker, A Life and Times, Frédéric Chopin. And this book is really wonderful to give you a window into the mind of this genius, and also into the world around him, including Georges Sand. She was Chopin's lover and lifelong companion for many years. And there's a wonderful quote written by Georges Sand about Chopin's composing process. She says, "His composing was spontaneous, miraculous. He found ideas without looking for them, without foreseeing them. They came to his piano sudden, complete, sublime, or sang in his head while he was taking a walk, and he had to hurry and throw himself at the instrument to make himself hear them. But then began a labor more heartbreaking than I have ever seen. This was a series of efforts of irresolution and impatience to grasp again certain details of the themes he had heard. So he was thrown into a kind of despair. He shut himself up in his room for whole days, weeping, walking about, breaking his pens, repeating, altering a measure 100 times, writing, erasing." So what I thought when I read that, what I was struck by, is how similar that is to the process of practicing Chopin's music as well. Sometimes the concept of a phrase hits you, like a thunderbolt, but then it can take such an effort to really translate that perfectly into the piano and understand how every nuance of the phrase contributes to that, that feeling, that atmosphere that you want to suggest. And I think the opening of this ballade shows that so well. It's such a fragile opening, and it's very hard to interpret, which is why if you listen to 10 different recordings of the fourth ballade, the very beginning, you're going to hear it played 10 different ways in all manner of tempos, fast, slow, some people really highlighting the phrase and growing in a big crescendo, other people trying to make it very delicate. And I think what's so difficult about it is that it has to be so suggestive, this opening. It has to convey such an intensity of feeling, but in such a small space and with such, with such a feeling of containment as well. So it's hard to make that work. The phrases, the way they are sculpted, is absolutely beautiful. Let me play it one more time. And so on. You also hear Chopin experimenting with counterpoint here, not only in the sense of one melody here, one melody underneath, but in the sense of different phrases going in different directions. While the right hand is leading up, the left hand is leading down. And that's something that happens many, many times. Something of that same kind of idea happens many times through the ballade. And then the single note. That single note opens up the rest of the piece. So the beginning is kind of like a memory that you can't quite recall. And then when you arrive to that single note, it's like the tear in the eye. Everything, you know how the piece, this sublime melancholy feeling comes to you right away. And then we have this terribly difficult theme to play. It's such an enigma because it's got every nuance, but it's also so simple. And even more than in the other three ballades, a ballade is a story. And this is a story told by a person that you can hear the character. We're introducing the person here. And it's a song right here. More than any of the other three ballades. At the very beginning of the fourth ballade, we have a song. We have this melody sung. And then underneath that, we have a piano accompaniment. So that really helped me to understand how to play this. You have to pretend to be two people, and the singer, whenever you've played with a singer as a pianist, you follow, 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 take every expressive cue from the singer that you're working with and let them have all the space they need to feel the melody. That's exactly how this must be played. But the harmony must not be forgotten in the beginning. I cannot imagine a chord progression more beautiful than this one. I mean, isn't that something? And now, so the left hand gives you the harmony, but every nuance of the harmony is also in the vocal line. This is a singer who knows exactly what's going on in the harmony and leads us through. So the harmony really tells the story, at least to me. The direction of the harmony, the color of the chords, that's where the story is told. And the melody has to just have this exquisite and natural phrasing. And then it leads to this part. Chopin, Courteau says that Chopin is kind of a precursor to Impressionism, which I find a very interesting idea. Impressionism meaning Debussy and Ravel, this kind of coloristic piano sound. And I think right here, that's the impressionistic side of Chopin. The other thing that happens throughout this piece is we get variations on this melody. And so my advice to anyone playing is, when you're playing the variations, make sure that the audience listening is going to connect the melody so that they can build this story up in their mind. They understand, oh, this is where this was coming from. Now we have it like this. we have so much going on here, but the melody has to really be in charge, and the melody has to be voiced very well above everything else that's going on in the texture. And then even more difficult is to put this variation into the same character. So if it gets too fast or too, voluptuous too soon, then it's not going to sound like the beginning at all. It's not going to recall that. So you have to find a way to preserve that and then depart from that in a natural evolution. And the other evolution that goes on through the piece is the second theme. At the beginning, the first time you hear the second theme, which is about halfway through the piece, and then near the end of the piece in D flat major, so the context of those themes is so different that it can be hard to make them sound like the same idea expanded. I've tried to think about that a lot. The first theme, the first statement of it can be described as a chorale, and it certainly has this kind of devotional feel. But it's also got a wonderful lilt in the rhythm. Courtauld describes it as a barcarolle, a boat song, so it's got this kind of dance-like quality. Chopin is always very close to dance or to ballet in his music. Now, when it comes back the second time, it's easy to get carried away with that lilt. But you have to make sure that it still has a bit of the feeling of a chorale, in that the phrasing has a wonderful straightforward quality to it, and the melody, the contour of the melody really shows. And then, of course, we build, and we build until we get to those three very punctuated chords, each marked with a staccato dot, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're short, it means they're punctuated. And then, like a vision of the past, a memory of these faces. Until it explodes. And I said earlier that the music is being ripped apart at the seams. Well, I really meant that in a very literal way, because the beginning is, the harmony is so clear, the crystal, as the poet said, the crystal of his harmony. So clear, so beautiful, so consonant. And then in the coda, it becomes so dissonant. It becomes like Chopin is trying to find every moment he can to express the pain of this part. So he's heightening the emotion here with a lot of dissonance, and he's using that for an extremely expressive purpose. The whole ballade tells the story, and the ending is ultimately so devastating because of that. And that use of dissonance is going to bring us right into the next composer I'm playing, Alban Berg. Alban Berg is a composer who used a lot of dissonance to heighten the expressivity of his music. Listen to the beginning of his sonata. How about that? So that's the very beginning of the Sonata Opus 1 by Alban Berg. It was an early piece for him, and it was the piece he wrote upon his graduation of his studies with Arnold Schoenberg. And you can hear the very first chord. You can hear exactly who Alban Berg was most indebted to at this point as a composer. To start a piece with a chord like that, well, it can only remind you of one thing. I'll play this. Imagine a whole group of cellos playing. So A+ for you if you correctly guessed Wagner, Richard Wagner, the very beginning of his opera Tristan and Isolde. And that opera, when it was premiered in the 1850s, inspired a whole generation of artists, from Nietzsche to Schoenberg, Debussy. I mean, everyone who heard it either loved it or hated it and wrote art as a consequence of that passion. And it's just amazing to have that chord that has such a beautiful sonority, but it feels so unattached. It's floating in the air, and you cannot tell where it's going, what's going to happen next. Berg wanted to have the same thing at his, and in fact, the chord that he used, the chord that he invented, let's say, is really a transposition of the Tristan chord, but changed by the top note. This was a transposition, exact transposition. And then Berg has just raised that top note by one extra step, as if to make the music just that little bit more expressive or intense or uncertain. And that's Berg's identification with the expressionist movement of art. So let me take a step back and explain expressionism for one moment. It was an artistic movement in all of the arts, especially in Germany at the beginning of the 20th century. You probably can imagine the painting in your mind, the Scream, that one. That's an expressionist painting. There was expressionism in poetry, in literature, in the theater, and a little later on, expressionist silent films. So, and of course in music. And Alban Berg, in my opinion, is the most expressionist of all of the composers of that time. And it's all about heightening the expression through dissonance, finding the darker sides of everything. The expressionist artists you actually did a lot of portraiture, so they wanted to use a classical form like the portrait, but then distort it in some way. Show all the shadows, show the lines in your face, and even more disturbing, disfigurement, things like that. So Berg is similarly taking a sonata, which is the oldest type of form, right? Not the oldest type of form, that's for sure. But it's a very old type of form, a classic form for him, and he's disfiguring it in his own ways. But he wants you to know that this is a sonata, and it's a sonata in B minor, which is why right there at the very beginning, he says, like a stamp on it, B minor. And like all of the old-fashioned sonatas of Mozart and Haydn, this sonata even has a repeat of the exposition, the first part of the sonata. So why composers wrote repeats like that in pieces? Well, I don't think that there's only one answer, but one reason is because listening to a piece of music is kind of like following an argument. And so the composers were trying to convey to you this kind of series of events associated with the keys that they go through and the moods that they go through. And as you're listening, you're following along. You're putting the pieces together in your own mind as you're listening. And then you get a chance on the repeat to try again. So it's or to maybe this time enjoy that progression as you've already, you can sort of watch it unfold. And so I'm going to use that device of the repeat, or maybe abuse it, to go through the exposition with you the first time, and kind of narrate it along and talk about Berg's musical language, and then play on the repeat all the way through the rest of the sonata. So in the next part, right after that opening phrase, you'll hear Berg's uses of suspensions. Suspensions are when you take one note that doesn't belong to the chord, like this, and you resolve it. Every composer, I mean Mozart, it's just littered with that kind of thing. It's part of his natural musical language. But by the time we get to Chopin, it's becoming kind of a romantic gesture. So that feeling of anguish, that's what Berg is going for in his musical language. What we'll have in the next part is this beautiful melody that rises up like this. These leaping intervals going up. It might sound strange at first, but it's also a very highly expressive device. And composers before Berg were doing the same thing. Berg's just exaggerating it. That's part of his expressionism. For example, Brahms, who was another composer, kind of the opposite of Wagner, the way that people tell it, but Berg and Schoenberg were also very much looking at Brahms. Listen to the scherzo from his third piano trio. This is in the middle of that movement. So the leaping upward, it's so expressive, and then it takes effort to reach up to those high notes. And then the scale that was coming down is so relaxing. So in both directions, going up and down, there's kind of this exaggeration of musical contour. Listen to Berg. I love those chords right there. They're so mysterious. Berg is he's not just limiting himself to major and minor. He's also using a lot of diminished harmonies, which is already old hat by this point. He's going into augmented harmonies too. And he also is using fourths in a moment. You'll hear fourths in the next excerpt. Or even, it's kind of a golden sound, those fourths. So now the sonata goes back to the beginning. We just arrived at the second theme of the sonata, just like Chopin's Ballade had a second theme, by the way. And now what you can hear is right there. Berg has taken us farther and farther away from the key of B minor through all of these crazy chords. But now we've got a nice dominant on A, and a dominant on A. So it relates back to his tonal structure. At the key moments of the architecture of the piece, he brings us back to the sonata form, back to the bass line, so that we can, never completely lose the path. And this second theme is another gorgeous Berg melody, very tender, very delicate. In the next part, as the second theme kind of takes flight, you're going to hear Berg's tempo changes. That's another very unusual feature of this sonata, is that every page, on more than one time per page, he's writing accelerando, ritardando, accelerando, stretto, allargando, all of these different ways of saying speeding up and slowing down. He really wants you to feel that flexibility, and it's beautiful. In the next kind of bar by bar, you'll hear this floating up, you know, lying back, floating up, lying back. Dominant seventh chord right there. So he's taking us back to harmony. And in fact, we had an actual Tristan chord right here. Those are all the correct notes of that half diminished chord before it just kind of dissipates into these fourths. Now is leading into the closing section of the exposition, the coda, which leads so wonderfully back into the repeat. You might not even notice how the melody evolves there. And there we took the repeat. So now I'll play through the exposition again and continue on through the development and the recapitulation. There's so many more beautiful moments to come. It's very orchestral, so I'll have my whole arsenal of French horns and trombones with me. And then there's some beautifully hypnotic, quiet moments. And then at the very end, Berg retraces the steps of Wagner. You remember that Tristan chord right at the beginning of Wagner's opera. Well, 3 hours later, at the very end of the opera, he comes back to that Tristan chord once more, like a question that needs to be answered. And then it melts away into the beautiful B major chord that ends the opera. Berg does the same thing in the end of this sonata. He poses that question from the beginning one more time, and then finally gives it its answer. And now I would like to share something very special with you.
How do I look?
You look fantastic. How do I look?
Great, you're a beauty.
This is Shirley Perle, wife of the late George Perle, whose piece I will play next. Thank you so much, Shirley, for sitting with me today and having this conversation. I've been playing the Ballade for a few years now. It's taken me a long time to get it into my fingers. But I understand that George wrote it here at this piano in this room.
That's right.
1980.
Yeah.
So tell me what you recall about the origins of the piece.
Well, George met Richard Good, and like everyone else, fell in love with his playing, and expressed a hope that one day he would play his music. And I asked Richard if George would write a piece for him, if he would play it. Richard said he would. So that's how the Ballade was born.
And the rest is history.
Yeah, it was, yeah, somewhat.
Perle heard Richard Good give a performance of Chopin's first Ballade and was inspired afterward to write his own. Perle loved Chopin's music from a young age. Shirley told me a story of the first time he heard Chopin's Etude in F minor, which begins like this.
Well, it was his first big musical, I don't know, apotheosis. He heard his cousin, who was an accomplished pianist, playing the F minor nouvelle, the first of the Trois Nouvelles Etudes.
Right.
And
Not a terribly well-known piece.
That's right, and he felt like he was having a transformational experience, and he was all of 8 years old.
Wow,
So,
8 years old.
Yeah,
So a long time ago.
yeah.
And you were telling me earlier that he still played that Etude all the way through.
He would come in, I'd be practicing, he'd come in and say he wanted to play it. He would sit down and play it and ask me if it was musical enough.
Listen to the beginning of Perle's Ballade. It sounds like this. What a wonderful atmosphere. I first heard the name George Perle in connection with his research on Alban Berg. He was one of the premier scholars of atonal music, and especially Berg. In fact, he discovered in Berg's string quartet a secret code which Berg wrote to his love affair. So we have here George's copy of Dr. Faustus by Thomas Mann, and that's a book that you said was influential to him.
Well, it was influential in the sense that he identified with certain aspects of the main character, the protagonist, the young composer. He didn't identify with him as an old composer because he died of syphilis. So
That's fortunate.
but the young composer in Dr. Faustus goes through a creative crisis where he feels that the means, the harmonic means that he's been using from 19th century music and so forth are no longer sufficient. And he wants to develop something further, and he proceeds to invent the Schoenberg 12th tone.
Right.
And now George went on to something else. He did work theoretically and came up with something called the 12th tone modal system.
Right.
But this was not a serial system at all, which obviously were Schoenberg's and Mr. Leverkusen's. It was another means of enlarging the harmonic vocabulary,
right.
I would say. Okay.
Right. So he wanted to, he felt he needed the whole universe of sounds.
He wanted to open up the possibilities, to get past the what had become the conventions of modulation and so forth, to get into something else. But at the same time, he wanted to preserve, he was very, very conservative, in that he wanted to preserve elements of the music that he loved, which is direction, coherence, key centers, all the things that we care about in music.
I think that last part is so important. And even without studying the theoretical intricacies of Perle's system of atonality, you can easily hear the principles at work in his music. Let's go through the ballade. At the beginning, which you heard earlier, listen to how it comes up and down and it comes back to the same pitches at the beginning and end of each phrase. So it's kind of hovering around the same pitch center, and it really gives it a sense of a phrase and sense of direction. Now it continues in that way. And where I just stopped, that was a repeat from the beginning of the same melody, but now in a different key. So you can hear the modulations, the atonal modulations that George Perle is creating. And then the next section gets swept up into a bit of drama. I really like those chords where the top note is staying the same, but the chord underneath is shifting. It gives you this very nice impression. And now we have a beautiful dynamic arc, which starts from a very dissonant interval and then expands into these beautiful harmonies. What beautiful harmonies. Like I was saying, he sees the whole universe of sounds, but he loves to find the stars. He loves to find the beautiful chords there. And now we have the same phrase again, but in another key. Bit of augmented chords. And George Perle, now he's going to go into some whole tone harmonies. The symmetry of whole tone harmonies is very appealing. The next part of the piece is very dance-like. It reminds me of another piece that he wrote, which is called a gigue. So it has the feeling of a gigue, which is a very specific type of French dance, but quite a quick one. But this gigue is very sinister. There's a lot of kind of dry staccato in the left hand. It has a mischievous feel. Very, very atmospheric. And it builds and it kind of evolves as it grows. So follow the key changes, follow the way that the material is growing and evolving until it reaches a big climax and then settles down into some beautiful, very intimate sections to finish the first half of the ballade. The next half of the piece begins with some material that he reused a few years later in another piece, one of his etudes for the piano, which is called Papillon. Papillon is the French word for butterflies, and it's also maybe a reference to a piece by Robert Schumann, which is called Papillon. So you'll hear these butterflies kind of fluttering around, and then and lots of different contrasting material that comes through in and out. And then it goes into a section with beautiful, beautiful floating chords and harmonies. And then a really dramatic climax to end the piece. I hope you enjoyed that. Now I will play one more piece, another American piece, even more recent, actually from 2018, and the composer is Logan Vrankovic. He was a student at Mannes, graduated here, and was a student of Lowell Lieberman here at Mannes. And I got to know him when I was a student here as well. And I've played several of his pieces. What I love most about his music is it's very fun. It's got such a wonderful energy. Hi, so we have here Logan Vrankovic, the composer of the sonata that I'm going to play next. And we are sitting here next to the Hudson River. I wanted to find a spot to record this where there's a lot of energy, this New York energy, which is what I feel when I play the piece. So, Logan, thank you for writing it. It's been such a pleasure. You wrote this piece back in 2016, and then I think you gave it to me in 2018 when you revised it. So tell me about that.
First of all, thank you. I appreciate the New York energy. As a native New Yorker, that's definitely what I want to put in a lot of my music. The reason for the revision is I wanted to make it more idiomatic for the instrument. So between 2016 and 2018, I hacked it out myself on the piano to just make it a little bit more, to make it speak a little bit more honestly on the instrument. And that moment in 2018 where I gave it to you, we were in the same choir in school. You were accompanying the choir, and I very hesitantly asked you, "Hey, do you want to look at this?" And that was really the start of a friendship where we've written a lot of music together and made a lot of music happen. So
yeah, I haven't written any music for you, but you've written some great music for me. I also played Logan's piano concerto with the Mannes Orchestra, and that was such a blast. And you just gave me your second sonata, which is very different from the first sonata. First sonata is so bright and joyful, and the second sonata is much more serious and involved, and I'm really excited to take a crack at it soon.
Well, I'm really excited to hear you play it. You're definitely my favorite pianist.
Oh, that's very nice. Thank you, Logan.